He was banned for a couple of months, but the king has returned. Setsuko is grinding set 13 and he doesn't look rusty whatsoever. He easily hit rank 1 and he's doing it in typical Setsuko fashion where he's playing all kinds of augments, all different kinds of comps, good and bad, and making it work. In this episode of In Too Deep, we're going to watch Setsuko play one of my favorite augments, Build Different, to see just how strong his board building is and all the decisions he makes to secure a really good finish. Let's break down what exactly makes a successful Build Different formula. The first thing to think about is who is your backline AD carry. The most common setup is going to be around Twitch because he's the most uncontested, so it's just really easy to hit Twitch, and you can also build him pretty successfully by building a Rage Blade early and converting into it. But you also can play Corki and even Jace as backline AD depending on what you hit on your level 8 roll down. Second is who's going to be your beefy tank. You need someone who has a lot of cake. And so someone like Alawi 2, Mundo 2, and even Elise can be a tank, but she's also sort of CC. The problem is Elise as a tank sometimes jumps away from your team, so you have to be mindful about that. She's a little bit more on the utility side. And then the third thing is who is your duo carry? And you have a lot of options here. It could just be another AD carry. For example, you could play Twitch and Corki, or maybe Twitch and Jace. But you could also just play a bunch of other different units based on what your items are and who you're hitting. So if you hit Echo, for example, you can just give him a bunch of healing and AP. If you hit Ambessa, you can just give her the traditional Ambessa items. If you hit 5 costs that are really powerful, like Mordekaiser and LeBlanc, you can also itemize them accordingly. Once you have those 3 things down pat, then you want to just basically fill out the rest of your team with units that have impact through support and utility. And there's a lot of different ways that support and utility get categorized in TFT, but here are a few examples to help you get started. The first is, does this person have a stun? Vi, for example, is really good. She's usually uncontested, and she stuns and does a lot of utility. Set is also a really cheap unit you can play early and mid game that also stuns units. Shields help the team a lot, especially if you're trying to build a lot of resistances. Lowers, for example, helps adjacent allies, and then Lux is able to shield an ally directly. Or if you need something that helps you with a little bit of anti-resistance, so let's say you don't have Last Whisper and Even Shroud and you just can't build it, you can always throw in an Urgot, but be careful, Urgot actually links to Corki, so you have to be mindful about that. And also, Rel steals resist from enemies, so she also can be pretty nifty in some tight situations, and also she's not too bad as a frontline as well. And then the most important thing about Anomaly is you always choose your strongest itemized unit. This is because you don't want to roll that much gold. You want to roll between 10 to 15 gold maximum, because ultimately how much gold you spend determines how strong you can get to level 9 and convert into a top 4 and beyond. So oftentimes with your anomaly, just click on whoever is upgraded and try to play around your best unit. Now I know augment stats aren't available, but if you actually look at some stats website, you can filter out all the traits and actually get a good glimpse of what Build Different is around. This is not a true representation of Build Different stats, but it's around this range. The best units to play around by far are the 6 costs, but that'll always look good in the data because of survivorship bias. And the units that you want to play in order are Victor, Mel, and then Warwick. They're just always good to play on your board, and even if you don't have Build Different activated on them, they're still very powerful. The next group of units that you want to think about are the 5 cost carries that can do a ton of work. Mordekaiser, Jace, and LeBlanc. Mordekaiser holds the attack speed AP items, Jace holds the raw AD items, and LeBlanc also holds a bunch of AP. The last 5 costs to really consider that's in the S tier is Rumble, and that's because he offers so much utility, and also because he can do a ton of damage himself. Rumble's considered to be the best 5 cost in the game by now by most top players, and the fact that he's even just really good and Build Different shows you exactly why that is. In the A tier are just carries that you're most commonly going to play around if you get the opportunity to. It's just that they're not like S tier broken. The first batch that we have are the 5 costs that are also good when you upgrade and itemize them. Like Savika 2 and Caitlyn 2 and Jinx 2 and Malzahar 2 are just good units to play and Build Different as long as they fit in your board. But you're not really going to be going out of your way to try and play for them if you have like 1-star Caitlyn. Don't try to itemize her. 1-star Malzahar is really weak, and Savika 1 just gets blown up a lot. So this is just one of those things to think about when you go to 9 and if you're holding pairs and you upgrade them. Corki, Twitch are the primary AD carries we talked about. Alawi and Vi look really good in the data to help provide the frontline. And then here's one thing that's kind of interesting that I think is really debated, which is emissaries can be splashed in and you can even activate their traits. For Emissary Splash, there's a lot of debate about whether or not you want to play Garen or Ambessa or both, right? Because if you look at an Emissary, there's actually a 1 or 4 piece trait. So they think, if I play 2 Emissary, I deactivate both of them. Very clever. But the problem is that these units are actually quite powerful because of their Emissary bonus, and that's how they've been designed. And so without it, they feel actually significantly weaker. And so a lot of people actually play them for their 1 Emissary value, or they would deactivate them later on because they're just unit quality that they can also play around with their upgrades. So it kind of depends based on the situation, and you should flex around accordingly. Around the B tier, the only controversial thing based on the stats is I think Elise. I think Elise is actually quite a good unit in build different because her stun can change the entire fight. But I think it's because Elise is really hard to hit, and because she's so commonly played, her stats get dragged down a lot by the average result. But she is technically in B tier. And then these other units are fine when you upgrade them and you play them. Mundo 2 is not bad. Silco and Echo can do a lot of damage, but you need to upgrade them and have the correct items for them. And then in the B tier are also units that surprisingly do fine if you just keep them in your composition even to the end of the game. Rel, is, as we talked about, is decent utility, and she's a Sentinel with Rumble. So if you end up playing Rumble, you might as well activate Sentinel anyways because you're not getting Rumble value with build different. So that's kind of one way you play basically like the Emissary setup. And then these are the 3 costs that actually just provide a lot of either damage or just they're just solid units. Rennie, for example, does a really good stun, which could be really clutch, and Scar also can potentially stun a really key unit as well. Then finally, in the C tier are units that are commonly played that you probably just don't want to play very often. Heimer and Zoe are by far the weakest 4 cost, and then Nami and Tristana are only used to often splash like a 2 Emissary. Let's say you find in a best of 2, but you can't find Garen at all, and you want to play 2 Emissary, you often play like a Tristana or a Nami. Finally, let's go over Augment synergy. Obviously, you're going to be picking build different on the first one, so these are all 3-2 and 4-2 augments that you should consider. The first thing to consider is that build different is really expensive, so you're going to need a lot of gold to get to fast 8 and roll, and then ultimately relay that into a fast 9. So things like placebo and rolling for days help you a lot. HP is always really good with resistances because the resistances makes your HP more valuable, so things like lineup and playing a little bit more around melee can be really powerful. You also really want a lot of items for this composition because you have so many 4 costs that you end up playing around, and you really want to give them items to amplify their effectiveness, so support items go a really long way. The best gold, in my opinion, to play around for the backline 80 carry is all that Sherbus Plus. Just take that gold collector, and now you have a guaranteed gold collector for your Corki, your Twitch, or your Jace. Contested is one of the most insane gold accumulation augments in the game at 3-2. It is so powerful to get you 4, maybe even 6 gold every single turn. I want to give a shout out to Golemify. This and Dumbify actually works with build different because you have so much extra bonus HP. So if you happen to have Golemify and you're in a good economic spot, I've actually seen it do extremely well. So just something to consider. But if you're poor and you're not really hitting a lot of upgrades and you're not having a full bench, try to avoid this augment. But it is very, very fun. The best prismatic, in my opinion, is Lucky Gloves. This thing just helps you itemize all your upgrades and just gives you so many item qualities. That's really good. Always keep an eye out for Coordination. This is just a generically really powerful prismatic augment. Dark Alley Dealings, Trenchcoat combos on Mbessa and Vi and other units that can really love that item combo is going to be really devastating. And then just take other really things that give you big payout and cash outs like Prismatic Pipeline. All right, so with that knowledge, let's go ahead and jump into the game. Let's hop on to Setsuko's POV at 1-4 so that we can get a lot of context as to what items and what units he had before he picked build different. The encounter is no encounter, so there's no extra resources, which is kind of a big deal. A lot of times when you're playing build different, you feel like you need a lot of resources because you're going to be pursuing a lot of 4 costs, 5 costs, and even 6 costs, which requires a lot of gold to hit and also gold to level. So he's going to have to be a little bit more frugal than usual. He ends up holding Sentinels and Nocturne while also having a bow, a cloak, and a belt. Let's go ahead and break down his augments. He's going to pick build different, so we're already knowing that he's going to hold this option. So let's talk about Epoch. Epoch, now at the start of each stage, gains 60 XP and 2 free rerolls. This is pretty decent econ augment, and it actually has a lot of flexibility. It gives you 6 EXP while also giving you free rerolls that you can hold on to later in the game. You can also just use it immediately if you're close to upgrades at any time to either maintain streak or to just, play a specific scenario. It's not exactly the best econ augment out there, but it's an okay safe option. It's not as good as some of the other econ augments out there that's giving you 2, maybe 3 gold a turn equivalent. Like I like Slammin' a lot better than Epoch because Slammin' gives you an item and it gives you 2 EXP per round. So I think it's like okay, not amazing. Superstars is a reroll augment, and it's only good primarily in reroll comps that have a lot of 3 stars. So there's pretty much 2 that I'm thinking about, which is Renata Visionaries and Family Violet. I don't think it's applicable here because we don't really have the units. We don't have like the family members, and even if we did have the Rels, we don't have good items for it. No tears, no rods. So I think that's a skip as well. Setsuko actually rerolls Warpath and holds the other 2. He doesn't immediately reroll Epoch. Warpath is just not a very serious augment whatsoever. I think that this is a fun augment because it's like a delayed cash out where, somewhere by the end of stage 4 or maybe beginning of stage 5, you get a bunch of, fun champions and items to play around. But in a high elo lobby, this is not a very serious pick, so I don't think he's going to consider it. And after about 5 more seconds, he decides to go for a reroll on the second option and gets Adrenaline Burst. He does have a Nocturne here in the first slot of his bench, so he actually could go for Adrenaline Burst, but he doesn't have anything that really makes this spot really powerful for Nocturne. Like, it's okay if you can hit a Nocturne 2 immediately and you have a slammable item. So let's say he had like a Bloodthirster or Titans or a Quicksilver or something like that. He can slam that item immediately and then win streak with Nocturne 2 and capitalize on the fact that you get a Nocturne and Akali. But if you hold Adrenaline Burst, if you play Adrenaline Burst and then you hold Akali and Nocturne, you're not going to make gold for a while. You'll lose, win, because you can't really sell your units because you need to hold on to them for later on. You kind of end up in a situation where you're kind of poor, your items aren't very good, and your health is not in a good spot. So I don't think this is a really good Nocturne spot. If there's a way for him to guarantee an artifact of some kind, maybe if this is an artifact start with an artifact anvil, then I think you could probably consider this. But, you know, with that being said, I'm pretty sure this is why Build Different had to be the clear pick, and it's his best start to the beginning of the game by far. All right, so we clicked Build Different, and we got offered a lot of 2 costs, which is actually not a good thing because you want to focus on upgrades early game with Build Different. You want to play around 2-star 1 cost as best as you can. But he does choose to level, and he's going to be playing around Urgot. Urgot is pretty decent for utility, as we talked about in the guide, because he offers utility in the form of Sundering, which is actually really interesting because it looks like he's going to make Even Shroud. And Even Shroud provides 30% Sundering, while Urgot's ability provides 20%. But that only happens when Urgot casts. So, you know, right now, Urgot's going to cast 7 seconds into the fight, and you don't have Sundering until that happens. And even then, it's 20%, which is not as high as 30%. And all these small little things might end up making a difference. And then there's a second element of it to consider as well, which is what is he going to do with his other components after he slams? And then the other element to consider is what components does he want to play around for Carousel? And right now, he knows that bow is probably the most important thing to play around for Carousel, because a lot of times that's either Rage Blade for Twitch, or I guess he already slammed the Even Shroud, so Last Whisper. Could also go for things like Red Buff. So he just knows that that's just the component that's best to play around for the Carousel, and doesn't want to greed too much. Okay, going up against another level 3 player here with Starry Night, so 2 easy victories, which is really good. And he's holding on to the Darius pair with the Swain, so he has a couple of upgrade prospects. The tricky thing about units like Swain is that 3 trait units are really easy to activate this set. They've actually done a really good job making a bunch of 2 splash traits easy to, you know, get some synergy. So if you're playing Bronze for Life, very easy to activate traits. The flip side is this set, it's really easy to deactivate Build Different if you're not careful. So just keep that in mind. He sells Urgot because he has the Even Shroud, so some of the effect of Urgot is already reduced, which is that, you know, he already has Sundering. And he's going to play Gangplank because Gangplank is just a powerful 3 cost to play around early, and we don't have activated traits. It's totally fine. Setsuko, by the way, is also holding on to Set and Darius onto his bench, and that's important because if he does upgrade Rel 2, he needs to think about who his next unit in will be. And so now he has options for either that Set, which can add a little bit of stunning, or if he hits a Darius too. So unfortunately, he is last pick on the Carousel, but let's see what he chooses to do with his remaining components. He has open bow, and he ends up getting a belt. Pretty sure this is just because belt is generically a really good component to play around, as well as the fact that it's a set pair, so that's nice. He's playing the Set and the Rel, and he's actually comparing their stats, their HP, and saying who is actually more valuable in this spot, because Build Different does give a flat amount of HP, and so who actually is the better unit to play? And it looks like he actually says that Set's like pretty good, and I'm gonna actually take out this Nocturne because he scouts around and he sees, you know, Nocturne's not exactly like the best tank. Plus, I can do things like put a bow onto the Gangplank, be a little bit more efficient with my items. This fight looks really close. It looks like Setsuko's probably gonna lose since there's a 2-item Gangplank, and we didn't slam something like the Gnasher's Tooth. And I even see someone in chat actually saying Gnasher's wins this. But I want to point out one thing, which is if he decides to take a belt and slam Gnasher's Tooth, there's going to be a mismatch of items, which is Gnasher's Tooth is much more of a AP attack speed item, and Even Shroud is much more focused on physical damage. And so if he has one item pulling him in one direction and one item pulling him in another, he's going to have a really awkward mid game and not have a full set of items on a carry. At least not a full set of items on a carry that synergizes with his front line. And that's sort of the bet that he made by choosing to slam Even Shroud first. By doing that, he's committing to AD, and then he was last pick on the carousel. But I like that he's actually consistent with his theme here, because if he did choose to slam a Nashers, I think he's going to run into really awkward item issues in the mid and late game if he chose to slam that Nashers. And unfortunately, he ends up losing too. So this is definitely one of the downsides of his choice on the carousel. He couldn't slam Runan's Hurricane. And so by doing that, he actually lost too because he doesn't have a slammable item. A lot of people actually believe that if you don't streak with Build Different in the early game, by getting the 5 win and getting a bunch of gold, you're going to struggle a lot in the mid and late game. Oh my goodness, actually, he gets dropped a Corki, a gold orb, a Corki, and a Mundo. And funny enough, neither of them have synergy with each other. So that ends up being a good thing. And that pair that we held for a long time is paying off. So it looks like we hit that Rel. He can even play another copy of Set or Rel. He doesn't actually have to play another unit that's unique. Okay, well, if we weren't going to slam things like Runes before, we got to slam it now, I think. That's definitely his best item. You can also think about slamming a Guard Breaker here with the glove. But Guard Breaker is really good if you have an Infinity Edge because it's a complementary crit item. Guard Breaker just by itself is not actually that good, specifically on an AD carry, because Guard Breaker actually gives you hybrid stats and a lot of AP stats. So it's something that's like, again, kind of okay, but not really that good right now in the early game. Not to mention that Guard Breaker also gets better in the late game because the more units that are on the board, the more chances you have to activate the shield damage amp opportunity. All right, let's go ahead and break down the 3-2 augment here. The first augment is Hero Grab Bag. Hero Grab Bag isn't really a common thing in Build Different because you're not really rerolling 3 costs very often. Usually the only time 3 costs reroll and Build Different is good is if you get like a very, very, very powerful combo that you just cannot ignore. Something like, you know, Lich Bane Kog'Maw, for example. That's just probably never going to happen. It's very, very rare. I don't think I've seen it at all so far this set, so this pretty much just never pick here. I guess you could take Heroic Grab Bag and use it on a 3 cost for tempo and maybe take it for 9 gold. But I think, again, that's a little bit too much of like, I need to win now. I need to get this gold. And I think that's sacrificing too much of the future power because it's a gold tier augment that we're going to be sacking for it. Spear's Will is actually quite good here because we get to slam Infinity Edge immediately on Corki, which is one of his best items. And we get to keep the belt so we can make that into a frontline item. So I actually really like Spear's Will here. It's pretty solid too. It gives you 10 mana for your whole team, which is not bad. If you play 8 units, that's 80 mana for your team. I mean, every little bit helps. Power Shield is a pretty specific augment that's pretty good on traits that give you a lot of shielding inherently. So it's very good on Dominators because you start off with a shield. Very good with Scrap, for example, because it gives you a shield. Very good with Renata. Renata shoots, gives a shield, so on and so forth. But in this spot, it's not very applicable, so I probably think that it's not good enough as a combat. Plus, another thing to consider is that we lost our streak, and remember, we picked Build Different. We really want something like good econ or items to make up for the fact that we have good combat power. So I think Spear's Will is probably the choice that I would hold here and roll the other 2. Interesting. We actually got 2 other augments that you could argue is stuff that he needs. Slammin is EXP, which is equivalent of gold value. And the thing about Build Different is you're often thinking about how much gold you can get to level 8 and roll for all the 4 costs, which are really expensive. Not to mention that Slammin also gives a random component, so he could actually theoretically get something like the spear, or rather the sword, and slam it. That being said, if it's something like really awkward, like a rod or a tier or something else I doesn't really want, then it could be kind of awkward. So that's something to consider. Big Grab Bag is just 3 components and a little bit of gold and 1 Reforger. So it's just like a little bit of just everything. I actually think Big Grab Bag is pretty solid here because not only would you be able to get something like a sword, but you could also get a completed item for your frontline unit. So let's say you get a belt, you can go for Warmogs. And the 2 gold helps a little bit. Every little bit helps. It's nice. So I can see an argument for Spear's Will, a Big Grab Bag. I think that I side on the fence of an item augment here because we did hit Corki and we have an open glove, and finishing these items can be really powerful for our mid game. So I'm leaning towards Spear's Will and Big Grab Bag because slamming is not a consistent amount of components, but it is a lot of gold, which is nice. And the other part of it is that I think I lean towards Big Grab Bag, but I could see him picking Spear's Will just because the 10% AD is also really good on the team in general. One thing to keep in mind is that Build Different gives attack speed, and attack speed just has raw synergy with getting flat AD as well. Like, Spear's Will isn't just giving a BF sword, it's also giving 10 AD, and that just adds up over time. When the whole team attacks faster, that means they're just going to hit more, and that just gives him more versatility with his damage spread here. So I'm actually kind of split, and I'm curious what he's going to pick. I'm not entirely sure. I think if I was in a spot, I would pick Big Grab Bag, but I could definitely see a Spear's Will choice here. Okay, so he does end up going for the Spear's Will. And I think that it's going to be really interesting to see if he's ever going to be short on item components later in the game, because then we could be like, ah, that's right. Should have taken the Big Grab Bag instead. But for now, I think this is totally fine. Looks like he also replaced Rennie over Set because Rennie is, you know, a higher cost unit, and she also CCs, and she actually is pretty clutch in a lot of situations. She's definitely in that tier of units that are solid and decent for build different. Okay, gets a really easy win, and, you know, Corki with 2 items, a lot more effective, and we were able to get his best item. Things are looking a lot better all of a sudden. He's scouting around just to see what people are playing. So there's like a Tristana Urgot. Looks like there's a Family Violet reroll and a Renata reroll. So a lot of reroll in this lobby. And that also might be why he wanted to take something like Spear's Will to keep up his tempo. Because in reroll lobbies, a lot of people end up upgrading their board and pressuring you. Because on stage 3, they're rerolling for, you know, things like Vex 3. So you want to be as strong as possible. If he took something like Slammin', he might not win any fights and instead be taking a lot of damage. So he wanted to maximize the best possible chance he could to actually win. And that's actually pretty huge. Able to beat some of these reroll comps in stage 3 are huge dubs. He's holding on to Silco. He has no items for Silco, so I'd be surprised if he plays around him meaningfully. Because even if he gets something like a tier or whatnot, he's going to try to complete a frontline item here, in my opinion. He has an open belt, so ideally, either of these belts would be really good for him to go for Warmogs. But if he isn't able to, he probably grabs like another sword or a glove. Oh, interesting. He actually grabs another glove. Is this because he wants to go for a guard breaker now that he has the ability to combo it with the IE? Ah, okay. Wow, that's another unusual play. I think a lot of people traditionally just say like, oh, I have a belt. I have 2 backline items. Let me go ahead and complete Warmog, which is one of the best, you know, universal frontline items as well. But as we talked about before, guard breaker is a combo item that goes well once you have Infinity Edge. And so now he's actually trying to complete 3-item Corki as soon as possible. Really interesting set of plays here. Going up against Trenchcoat Violet and getting a pretty easy win. I think that's just thanks to how powerful Corki can be early. And all of a sudden, from a spot where I wasn't sure how his stage is going to turn out because, you know, he had Rel 2 and a bunch of 1-stars, he ended up taking a Spear's Will. And now he's on the verge of 5-streaking. If he can win this next fight, it'll be huge for him to be on fire going into stage 4. He's thinking about whether or not he wants to level now. And I guess he's evaluating his opponent's strength to see if he can push to level 7. And yes, it's a little bit off interval. Normally, the clean time to level to 7 is 3-5 because then you're, you know, a clean 36 out of 36. If he pumps 20 in right now, he's going to over level and kind of have gold inefficiency. But if it's worthwhile for him to be able to spike, and even if he's playing another Rel 1, that might be the difference between holding out long enough for Corki to finish off his opponent. And that'll be the reason he finishes stage 3 on a win streak. So I think this is actually a good play. It does look like it's overkill because he didn't match into the player that he thought he was going to. But I think this is a really safe choice to make sure that he can secure that 5 streak. As a general rule of thumb, try to level to 7 with at least 30 gold in the mid stage of the game here. Picks up another Mundo, so we have Mundo Pair and Elise as well. And you can see that he's just upgrading his board very systematically, you know, having a 2-cost, 3-cost, and the 4-cost Bruiser, just kind of moving it up, trying to anchor around this Corki. And if he didn't have this Corki, he'd probably put these items onto Zeri and then try to have Zeri carry. So I know a lot of people are probably going to be like, well, you know, the early Corki was huge, which is true, but he also has some other options. All right, let's take a look at his items right here. So we have Tier, Vest, Tier, and Glove. The best defensive item here to make for his tank, because we finished off our 3-item carry, so let's make a tank item, is probably Steadfast. But then we're left with 2 tiers, which is really awkward since Blue Buff is not exactly a good build different item. Build different gives you a bunch of attack speed, and that doesn't have a lot of synergy with Blue Buff. So we're probably going to have to slam something with Tier. And the only thing that looks like we can do is a Protector's Vow. And we could put that onto either a Mundo or an Elise. Protector's Vow gives you a little bit extra mana than usual. Like part of the bonus stats you get are extra mana. So it ends up being really good on a unit that wants to cast really fast. So Elise ends up being a really good holder of Protector's Vow. Okay, so he ends up putting it on the Mundo, which is totally fine as well, because this is just like stacking tank items. Generally speaking, just have items stack on top of each other. That's totally fine. Oh, that actually makes a lot of sense because he also has Mundo Pair. So he's much more likely to hit Mundo 2 with these items, and then be able to have a 2-star Mundo with 2 items on it, which is much more powerful than spreading out his items. Going up against the Bruiser Twitch player, it's actually a little bit unfortunate for this Twitch player that Setsuko also already has 2 Mundos because that is the unit that he needs. Let's take a look at his 4-2 augments. We got Flurry of Blows, Freaky Friday, and Movable Object. These are all item augments that empower his team. Flurry of Blows is interesting because it helps the Corki with the crit strike chance, adds some stats with it, and then the attack speed's really good. But the problem is we don't have good use of it for the positioning. We only have a Zeri and a Corki, and Flurry of Blows is a lot better when you have kind of like your front line squared away and you have like a 5 backline row that can really capitalize onto it. Or you have like a frontline melee composition, maybe like Nocturne with a bunch of quick strikers. You can frontline them and just kind of like bulldoze through. That's not really what this composition's about, so I don't think it's Flurry of Blows. Freaky Friday is okay. The problem with Freaky Friday Plus is that you get an Infinity Force, which is okay, but you don't get another one until 3 combats after. And that's a long time. The game can shift dramatically in 3 rounds on stage 4 because that's where most of the damage is dealt in the mid game. But also, a second Infinity Force is not particularly super impressive. A lot of times, at most, people want 1 Freaky Friday or 1 Infinity Force, and double stacking is a little bit awkward. Plus, another question is, who holds Freaky Friday right now? We have 3 items on a Corki. We would put it on, Zeri? Zeri doesn't even use some of the stats. And then we would have a melee carry that we don't even know if we're going to hit yet. So it feels like taking Freaky Friday is a little bit putting the cart before the horse. We don't even know if we have like a Bessa 2 or a Vi 2 or somebody else to put this on that would be pretty beneficial for it. A movable object is really good, actually. It has really good synergy with high health because the more resistances you have, the more effective HP you get, because 100 HP with 50 resistances is 50% more effective. And so a movable object ends up being really, really good, I think. So this is probably the choice that I would hold and roll the other 2. So our options rerolled are Anger Issues and Piercing Lotus. Anger Issues is a really funny augment. I don't think it works in Build Different at all. In fact, I'm not entirely sure how many compositions this set work with Anger Issues. I've heard some couple of underground builds that might work with Anger Issues, like Zeri reroll, for example. But I don't think that this is a serious pick right here, unless he thinks that it's really good for some reason and Build Different. I just don't think that's true. Piercing Lotus is pretty powerful if you have a lot of flat stats, because Piercing Lotus helps you convert those flat stats into critical strikes, so you have a good mixture of your damage formula. So Piercing Lotus, for example, really good in Rebels. Rebels gives you so much AD and AP. You convert off of it, you crit, and not to mention you get a little bit of utility through the Shred and Sundering. We already have an Even Shroud, so Sundering is not nearly as important, and we don't do magic damage, so Shredding is not valuable whatsoever. I think that it can be good in a spot if he had like a lot of AD. Let's say he was running Deathblade and Giant Slayer as his Corki items. I could see Piercing Lotus being a lot better here. But a movable object is really hard to argue with for the reasons we mentioned before. All right, a movable object it is. And we're going to have to rearrange our positioning a little bit, but we're going to do that after we roll down. We roll down and click all the forecasts, and you can see why Build Different is so expensive. I think we rolled 5 times, click the forecast every single shop, and we're done rolling. So there's not much else to do. It's going to slowly but surely replace his lower cost units. So he replaces the Rels, he replaces the Zeri, and trying to tech in whatever he can to try and get his forecast onto the board. And this is going to be a really common thing that happens with Build Different, which is you basically play a bunch of 1-star versions of your board until you can hit the 2 stars. I actually think he's probably just going to lose the next few fights because everyone just spiked with prismatic power, right? Wage and Iverson just hit a prismatic augment and they rolled it on 8. So this is going to be a pretty painful stage 4 if we don't upgrade something soon. One thing I want to point out that I think is worth noting. The chat is saying, oh, you have 1 emissary in. That's actually a point of contention where you can actually justify just playing 1 emissary to give your team a whole buff. You stack Build Different on Mbessa, for example, or Garen, but you also get the trade-off of having a whole team-wide buff. Getting resistances for your whole team can be pretty good, or having a Garen 2 buff 2 really valuable frontline units can be really good. So don't sleep on the 1 emissary in Build Different. Even though, yes, it's technically like loss of Build Different value, it's benefiting the whole team, and sometimes in the right situation, it could be really good. And that also applies to some other units like Rumble and 2 Sentinel. I've seen people with Build Different succeed by playing 2 Sentinel on their level 9, level 10 boards, and just using that to buff their entire team. Just because Build Different says you get value on your team for not playing traits on these units doesn't mean you have to have every single unit on your team contribute to that. You can have some utility and support. Okay, we got a clutch win on 4-3 against the Sentinel board, and we're looking for a way we can use this tier and this glove. Okay, looks like we got a sword off of the carousel, which is totally fine. Ah, that's huge. That's huge. So at 4-5, we finally are able to upgrade. We get the Corki and the Investa pair. Actually, that's not really the forecast I thought he was going to upgrade. I thought he was going to hit like Mundo and Vi and Alawi first, because those are like the less contested units. I guess there is a Twitch player though, so Mundo is kind of contested this lobby. But now he's going to try to play around itemized Mbessa. So because he hit 2-star Mbessa, he's going to put items onto Mbessa. And the interesting thing will be what anomaly he chooses in this spot. Because I could totally see him just choose something for Corki. But because of how poor he is, I wonder if he's going to consider something for Mbessa, for example, instead. He doesn't get to be very choosy, so let's go ahead and see what he chooses. I think we can break this down roll by roll because he has such little gold. Usually we don't do this on the video because there's just so many choices. Wolf Familiars is something that I think is really good if you have a lot of flat attack damage. So I think this could be theoretically really good on like Tristana 3, who ends up scaling a lot of AD attack damage over and over and over and over. That could be good with it. On Corki, with build different, he doesn't even have his artillers active. So Wolf Familiars feels a lot lower value than usual than, you know, even his usual spot, which is, it's okay. Oh, interesting. Is he actually going to take it? Chad is actually debating a lot about whether or not he should take it. Okay, he ends up rolling it. That was an interesting moment here. I actually really considered it for a while. Cold of Week is also very situational because I don't think it's very consistent. Every 3 targets target the lowest % health enemy in range. So you would want to put this onto a melee champion that's really good at being able to get to the backline and finishing off the backline unit. If you put it on Corki, he's just going to target the tank a lot of times. So I haven't really seen it ever played on a backline carry. If you were to pull Cold a Week, maybe you put that on like a melee carry like Mbessa. But I'm not entirely sure if you want to even choose Mbessa in this spot. The third option is Power Absorption, and this is one that I think he should pick. You get a lot of AD, which is actually what he's lacking because he doesn't get the AD from his traits. So he's getting AD from his Augment and his Anomaly. That's a good thing. Second is that he's also playing a lot of high tier champions. And one thing about higher tier champions is that they just have more raw stats. Like a 4 cost on average is almost going to have more HP, more AD, more magic resistance than units in the lower tier. And so by playing so many high value units like 4 and 5 cost on his board, he's naturally going to get a lot more power absorption value. So this is an excellent choice here, and I think he should stop here. All right, so we got power absorption, and that's actually honestly really fortunate. I think that's one of the biggest high rolls so far of the game, is that he only had to roll twice for his anomaly. There's been situations where I'm on low gold count and my anomalies are just not very good. So that's actually very fortunate. Up against a Heimer 2 with Gunblade, so he's going up against a sustain comp. These kinds of comps actually surprisingly are working in Corki's favor because I think it just gives him time to work on these tanks one by one. And it's pretty close, but it looks like he ends up losing here. This is a little bit of a rough spot for Setsuko because he lost his 3 streak, and I think that he was willing to carry his momentum over all the way into stage 5, but now that he lost and kind of evaluating his current spot with a bunch of pairs, he is going to be a little bit poorer, and he's probably going to have to roll until he hits a bunch of 2-star upgrades. And it actually makes sense. He's holding a Mundo pair, I think an Alawi pair, and a Vi pair. So, yeah, even if he actually won that previous round, he was always going to roll. That I think he has to roll until he hits these 2 stars. He's not clear to go to 9. And that's going to be really tricky because with build different, if you stay on 8 for the rest of the game, it's going to be really difficult to cap your board. He opens his anvil and he has Rod open. This is actually really unfortunate. He is on odd number of components. And remember, he got a sword off of Spear's Will. So this is going to be a little bit awkward with how he finishes his items. He has 2 choices. He has 1, he could either complete something for his Mundo and go for a 3-item tank. Or 2, he could try to complete an item off of Mbessa. Actually, 3, he has another option. He could go for a utility item. For example, he doesn't have anti-heal. So he could go for Morello, for example, and try to have guaranteed wounding for his team. But this is one of those spots that we talked about where if you hit Rumble, you can just skip that entirely and instead go for like a 3rd power item. In this case, if you're trying to go for like a Mundo item, you probably reforge the Rod and then try to play off the belt, for example, or make something for Mbessa like Deathblade. Looks like he is going to just make Morello on Twitch and just make sure that he has his utility. He's not rolling, actually, and that's a little bit surprising. If he's not rolling here, then he probably either wants to test the waters to see if he can actually get some free wins and scam his way to level 9. If he can win, you know, one of the next 3 fights, he might be able to get to 9 and still have multiple lives. But if he loses, like, you know, the next 3 fights, he's probably going to be in the, like, the low 30s by 5-5, meaning that he'll get to 9, he'll have no gold to roll. I think he actually has to roll here. I'm a little surprised he didn't roll. The base damage on stage 5 is 10, so if he loses by, you know, 2 or 3 units, every 2 fights, he's going to lose about 24 HP. So he's going to be in, like, the low 30s by the time 5-5 rolls around. And like we said, he won't even have the amount of gold available to even do anything on 9. He can just get to 9, maybe, and then just play, like, what, another 1-cost 4-star. Unfortunately, he rolled down and he missed everything. Oh my god. He actually oh god. He rolled and did not hit any of his 2-stars, and he didn't even hit any 5-cost that could be powerful splashes. Fortunately, it looks like it's at least not a 7th or an 8th just due to the amount of HP he's preserved. Actually, it's not even a 6th, so that is at least something good coming for him. He rolls and he upgrades, and hey, it looks like 3 people died. A bunch more 4-cost got shuffled in the pool. Maybe that's what he was waiting for, actually. I think now that I had an opportunity to maybe evaluate it, perhaps he was just waiting to see if he could roll after those players die and then actually hit. The rematch versus the Heimer player, we lost against this player at 4-6 previously. They just have a really powerful sustain setup with the Heimerdinger and the Sentinel dummy, but it looks like with our upgrades, we're just able to raw power through this. And now that he's at 44 HP, it looks like he's going to try to see if he can go to level 9, but he's very, very broke right now. He probably can't get to 9 until the middle of stage 6, which is just, you know, 5-6 rounds from now. He goes for Giant Slayer. Looks like he probably will just prioritize itemizing either the Mbessa or the Twitch. I think because he has Hand of Justice, you probably want to focus on, like, comboing items here. So I would probably think about putting this on Mbessa. Ah, I see. He's actually double stacking the Corki and putting the Runins onto Twitch instead. Okay, that's not a play that I saw, but I think that actually makes a lot of sense because Runins is not exactly one of Corki's best items. It's an item that Corki can use, but Corki is much more about casting his Rocket Barrage and dealing damage. The reason why it's not necessarily something that's intuitive is because he has double damage amp items. And usually when you stack Giant Slayer and Guard Breaker, there's a little bit of diminishing returns of stacking damage amp compared to some of the other stats that you can get. I think it's because Giant Slayer is just a better item than Runin's Hurricane. And remember, he has that raw attack damage from power absorption. So it's as if he has, like, Death Blade from his anomaly. So his items are actually like Infinity Edge, Deathblade, Giant Slayer, Guard Breaker. When you think about it like that, that's actually excellent. So that's actually a really good item recognition from Setsuko in a spot where I think some people would probably just be like, well, you know, I just want to take another item and try to complete it on one of my units here. Okay, he repositions over to the right side to try to go up against Twitch. And this is because the Twitch player can't really move, so he's just trying to get closer to Twitch, reduce that sniper damage. The farther they are away, the more damage they deal. And I think that positioning actually mattered. So another really clutch win. Can't help but notice, though, he's still at level 8, basically no gold interest. So he might be stuck on 8 for the rest of the game. I don't know if he can actually get to 9, unless there's like a massive, massive gold drop, and he survives till the second half of stage 6. But he's already secured a good top 4, and I think this is a really good showcase of kind of the highs and lows of Build Different, while, like, maximizing every opportunity he could, and also thinking very thoughtfully about his items and his augments. All right, so we get offered Shojin, Giant Slayer, Declaw, Bramble, and Last Whisper. He has 2-item Twitch and 2-item Mundo, and he's going to go for a Giant Slayer here on Twitch and try to go for a duo carry. He probably thinks that because he has Randuins, he already kind of has, like, that third tank item, and, you know, he's actually kind of got a lot of beef, and he might be lacking a little bit of extra damage here. So the Giant Slayer is good, not to mention that Giant Slayer also technically feeds a little bit into his power absorption. He moves to Jinx here, probably try to get a stun. Jinx always, her first cast will stun whoever she's targeting in a line. So it looks like she stunned the Malzahar here. He was hoping that this would stun the Malzahar and the Heimerdinger if the angle was slightly different. And the Corki and the Twitch. Ooh, my god, that was so close. You know what? That's a Giant Slayer difference. If he was slightly less damage, I think he would struggle a little bit here. And I think I would have been trying to prioritize, like, a 3rd-item Mundo. Because, like, you know, fundamentally, I'd be like, well, I kind of want the 3-item tank and make sure he's really beefy. But we already have that through the Randuin, so I think Setsuko is doing an excellent job here. And I wonder if he's actually going to be able to get to 9 and finish this game off. Going up against Pit Fighter Reroll. Oh, interesting. This guy went Draven 3 with Urgot 3 and Darius 3. Trenchcoat Violet. Just like straight up raw re-roll pit fighters. And he got Trenchcoat Violet. Okay. That guy's going to 9 as well. And now we're on a 5 streak. And we're at 40 gold. So we should be able to get there at 6-5. He's thinking about positioning. He's going to go up against a Twitch player again. And I think he's just thinking about taking the right side here against the Twitch because they can't move. Jinx in the bottom right corner to try to see if she can get the lineup stun onto this Twitch. Also, Elise on the right side as well to try to get the combo stun. So Jinx casts, stuns Twitch. Elise gets there. But it looks like Elise, did she actually even get the stun off? Oh, God. This fight RNG was a little bit brutal. I think if, like, the Elise was able to get the stun off, we would have definitely won here. All right, I watched it back, and I see what happened. The Rennie stuns the Elise right before she jumped, and then she jumped backwards towards our own team, not stunning the enemy. So a little bit unfortunate fight variance here for Setsuko. But the idea was good. It just so happened that it didn't work out this way because of the timing. The way you can actually navigate around that is sometimes to move Elise a little bit further back because she was in the front row, so Rennie was forced to go onto it. You might have the ability to circumnavigate that by rearranging your positioning a little bit. All right, looks like we're going to go for this Rage Blade, and then we can get Twitch. And now we have 3 full good items on Twitch. Who owns the Morello? I'm actually curious here. Okay, we leveled to 9. Get the Rage Blade onto Twitch. I guess we could Morello Jinx. She hits the whole board. Or you can Morello Elise and hope that she gets the cast off. You can also just be very safe and put it on someone like Dr. Mundo. You have so many removers, so you can remove it later. And then whoever Mundo just hits in his immediate vicinity will also get hit by the Morello. He is not slamming his Morello. Oh, he's so focused on the fight and the positioning, he's not actually slamming Morello. Okay. It's okay. We've all been there. Actually, I feel so much better. I do this at least like once a day on stream, so this actually makes me feel a lot more confident. It's okay. Mistakes happen. He actually lost by so few units. It makes me think this was a Morello diff. Oh, no. All right. He hits the Malzahar, and that's a good applier of the Morello Nomicon. And we're top 3, trying to see if we can get advantage over the Pit Fighter reroll. Okay, we're going up against their Ghost. The thing about this Trenchcoat Violet is you just have to kind of make sure that the Trenchcoat Violet is not within range of exploding onto your backline carries. A lot of times when they explode, she can just kind of aggro onto the backline, which could be really tricky. Wow, oh my God, this Pit Fighter just lethaled us, exactly. Okay, but the other player died, and it looks like it's just a second place instead of first. I kind of thought that I was in a position to play for first. But I think that was a really good job playing Build Different in a situation where it could have easily gone south if he wasn't playing his early and mid game very well. And I guess the moral of the story is Morello diff. I hope that game shows you the potential that Build Different has. Yeah, the win rate is really low, but you saw a player that maximized it as best as he could with a couple of moments where he forgot to slam items, but that's okay. That even happens to the very best, like rank 1 Setsuko. What did you guys think about Setsuko's gameplay? Is there something that stood out to you about Build Different? Let me know in the comments below. I'll catch you guys in the next video.